They say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes, family can be the cruelest people of all. My aunt, who I once trusted, told me I'd never be a mother. Not because of bad luck, but because she was certain I wasn't capable. At the time, her words crushed me more than I ever let on. But what I did next? It changed everything, especially for her. My name's Jessica, and if you'd asked me growing up, I would have told you my aunt was like a second mother to me. She was there when my own mom worked late, the one who picked me up from school, the one who helped me with homework, who cheered at my little league games, even when I struck out every time. On the surface, she was warm, always smiling, the kind of person who made you feel seen. But beneath that smile, there was a coldness I couldn't shake, something almost invisible unless you looked closely. Every family gathering was like walking a tightrope, and her smiles. They never quite reached her eyes. They were always tinted with this quiet, almost imperceptible judgment, like she was measuring me against some impossible standard, and finding me lacking. I remember sitting at the dinner table, the room buzzing with conversation and clinking silverware, while she fixed me with a look that felt like a slow burn. "Jessica, you really need to think about your future," she'd say in that calm, measured tone, the kind that felt less like advice and more like a verdict. Not everyone's cut out for the same things. At first, I brushed it off as typical aunt teasing, but over the years, those words settled deep inside me like seeds of doubt. What made it harder was that no one else seemed to notice, no one said anything, no one challenged her. So I kept quiet, swallowed the sting, and tried harder to prove myself, even when inside I was breaking. One of the hardest battles I faced was with infertility, a word I dreaded even saying out loud. For years, I felt this crushing loneliness, this desperate yearning that no one around me could understand. I went to doctor appointments alone, sat through endless tests and treatments, each negative result like a punch to the gut. But through it all, I never told my aunt. I was terrified of how she might react. Would she look at me with pity? Or worse, would she say, "I told you so"? So I hid it all, a secret locked away tightly in my chest. There were moments when I wanted to tell someone, anyone, to finally unburden myself, but I couldn't. Not her. The thought of revealing my pain to the one person who made me feel least capable was too terrifying. I was ashamed, but more than that, I was fiercely protective of my dignity. I didn't want her to have that victory. And then, one day, everything changed. I found out I was pregnant. I remember the moment vividly, the way my hands trembled holding the test, the sharp intake of breath as the second line appeared, impossibly faint but undeniable. My heart raced, a wild mixture of joy and disbelief swirling inside me like a storm. Suddenly, the entire future I'd imagined shifted in an instant. But even as happiness welled up inside me, a new kind of fear took root. I had to decide, should I keep this miracle a secret from my aunt, hide it away from the person who doubted me most? Or should I tell her, look her in the eye and say, "This is happening. I'm going to be a mother"? That decision felt like standing at a crossroads, each path shadowed with uncertainty. And as I sat there, holding that tiny positive test, I knew whatever I chose next would change everything. The first person I told about the pregnancy wasn't my aunt. It had to be someone safe, someone I knew would hold the news with tenderness, not judgment. That someone was my closest friend, Emily. The night I found out, I was shaking, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure the whole neighborhood could hear it. I called her immediately, my voice barely above a whisper, and when I said the words, "Emily, I'm pregnant," she gasped, then burst into tears of joy on the other end of the line. Her excitement was a balm for my nerves, a soft shield against the storm I knew was brewing. I couldn't risk telling my aunt first. I had seen the way her eyes narrowed whenever I tried to talk about future plans, the way her smile twisted just enough to let me know she wasn't really convinced. I dreaded the possibility of her saying something cruel at the wrong moment, words that could undo months of hope with a single sentence. I could still hear her voice from family dinners past, dripping with thinly veiled disappointment. So I held my secret close, a fragile treasure I wasn't ready to risk exposing to her skepticism. But the tension grew like a shadow in every family gathering after that. The room would buzz with conversation, laughter ringing through the air, but all I felt was the weight of her gaze, an invisible barrier that cut through me like glass. She looked right through me, not quite seeing who I was anymore, as if I was already defeated, written off before I had the chance to prove otherwise. Her cold indifference was almost worse than outright cruelty because it made me question myself in a way no harsh word ever could. One afternoon, months into the pregnancy, I finally decided I couldn't keep it a secret any longer. The news was no longer just mine, it was a part of me, growing and undeniable. I found her sitting in the sunroom, a place she retreated to whenever family events became too much. She was flipping through a magazine, her posture relaxed but her expression guarded. My stomach twisted into knots as I stepped inside. "Aunt Carol," I began, my voice trembling slightly. She looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "I'm pregnant," I said, holding her gaze, waiting for a reaction. She scoffed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Don't get your hopes up, Jessica. Some of us just aren't cut out for motherhood." Her words landed like a fist in my chest, sharper and heavier than any pain I'd felt before. It wasn't just the cruelty, it was the certainty in her tone, as if she'd already sentenced me to failure. I wanted to scream, to shake her until she saw me, really saw me, the scared girl who had fought so hard for this chance. But instead, I smiled. A small, brittle smile that barely masked the storm inside. Without saying another word, I turned and walked away, my footsteps echoing in the quiet room. The months that followed were some of the toughest of my life, emotionally and physically. The fatigue was crushing, mornings often greeted with nausea and tears I tried to hide. Every doctor's appointment was a mix of hope and terror, a roller coaster of emotions that I faced mostly alone. I found solace in sharing bits of my journey on social media, careful not to mention my aunt, careful to protect my heart from her shadow. I could only imagine what she thought, that I'd given up, that I was still the same Jessica she'd always underestimated. But the truth was far from that. Every day, I was growing stronger, not just physically but mentally, preparing for the moment I'd finally show her, and everyone else, that I was more than she ever believed. Then, something happened that made me realize I had a chance to turn this whole story on its head. It wasn't a grand gesture or a confrontation, but something simple, a single photo that would change everything, at least, that's what I hoped. It was a quiet afternoon, one of those rare moments where the world seemed to slow down just enough for me to catch my breath. The light filtering through the half-open blinds cast long, lazy shadows across the living room floor, bathing everything in a soft, golden glow that made the room feel warm and safe. Outside, a gentle breeze whispered through the budding leaves of the old oak tree in the front yard, sending faint rustling sounds into the still air. Inside, the house was filled with the comforting, almost sacred scent of lavender and baby powder. It was a smell I had come to associate with hope, with new beginnings, and with the fragile miracle that had arrived in my life only weeks earlier. I was sitting on the plush beige couch, one hand cradling my newborn daughter's tiny one, the other resting gently on my lap. She was sleeping peacefully in her crib just a few feet away, her soft chest rising and falling in a rhythm so steady and pure it could calm even the most anxious heart. Her face was serene, delicate, untouched by the harsh realities of the world she'd just entered. Her tiny fingers were curled into a perfect little fist, but when I reached out and gently slid my pinky into her palm, she instinctively wrapped her fingers around it, holding on like it was her lifeline. I sat there for a long time, just watching her. Her skin was so soft and warm beneath my fingertips, and the faint rise and fall of her breathing was like a lullaby I never wanted to end. In that moment, all the years of pain and struggle, the silent tears shed in the dark, and the moments when I'd felt broken beyond repair, everything seemed to melt away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of peace and purpose. Here she was, the living proof that despite every doubt, every cruel word, and every battle, I had made it through. I was a mother. But there was one person in particular who had never believed I could get here. One voice, sharp and clear in my memory, that had whispered, or rather, sneered, that I would never be a mother. That person was my aunt, Carol. Her words had cut deeper than anyone else's. At family dinners, she'd look at me with thinly veiled contempt, questioning my choices, my worth, my future. I had spent years trying to live up to her impossible expectations, only to be met with cold dismissal and harsh judgment. Now, holding my daughter's tiny hand, I felt a fierce, burning desire to show her, show everyone, that I had succeeded, in the most beautiful and undeniable way. My fingers trembled slightly as I picked up my phone from the coffee table. The screen lit up, reflecting in my eyes like a small beacon in the quiet room. I opened the messaging app and hesitated, my thumb hovering over the send button for a long moment. The message I was about to send felt heavier than anything I'd ever written before. I attached a photo I had taken that very morning, a candid snapshot of my daughter asleep, her peaceful face framed by a soft pink blanket, her tiny hand curled tightly around my finger. The image captured everything I wanted to say without words: love, hope, resilience, and the undeniable truth of new life. Below the photo, I typed a simple, unadorned sentence: "Meet the mother you said I'd never be." I reread it several times, feeling the weight of every word. This message was more than just a text, it was a declaration, a quiet triumph, a challenge wrapped in a moment of vulnerability. Would she laugh? Would she scoff? Would she even reply? Swallowing the lump in my throat, I pressed send. Immediately, a hollow silence filled the room. The hum of the air conditioner, the distant chirping of birds outside, and the faint creak of the floorboards under my shifting weight, all felt amplified against the stillness. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure she could hear it across the miles, that it would echo in her ears like a drumbeat of defiance. I stared at my phone, willing it to buzz with a reply. Seconds ticked by. Then minutes. Then nearly an hour. I began to doubt myself. Had I made a mistake? Was this just another moment where I'd been naive to think I could change her mind? The familiar ache of rejection crept in, slow and steady, threatening to undo me. Then, just as the light outside started to fade into early evening, my phone vibrated sharply against the couch cushion. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months: Aunt Carol. I held my breath, my hands shaking as I answered the call. Jessica. Her voice came through, softer than I remembered. It was hesitant, almost fragile, like she was testing the waters of a place she hadn't dared to visit before. I saw the photo, she said after a long pause, her voice cracking slightly. She's beautiful. Her words were tentative, as if she was afraid saying them out loud might break the spell of disbelief she was still trapped in. For a moment, I was silent. I didn't know what to say. The wall of tension that had built up over years of unspoken judgments was suddenly fragile, wavering. You're really a mother," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush, mixing surprise, regret, and something softer, maybe even pride. I could hear the catch in her breath, the weight of 1,000 unsaid apologies and unspoken feelings hanging between us. "I never thought I'd say this," she continued, her voice low and unsure, "but I'm proud of you." Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring the room around me. I swallowed hard, feeling a complex rush of relief, vindication, and a cautious hope blossoming in my chest. The call ended quietly, leaving me with the fading daylight and the soft, rhythmic breathing of my daughter beside me. The weight I had carried for so long lifted just a little, replaced by a quiet strength I hadn't realized I possessed. But deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. That photo, it wasn't just a simple image captured in a quiet moment. It wasn't just pixels on a screen or a fleeting glimpse of my newborn daughter sleeping peacefully. No, to me, that photo carried the weight of years, years filled with silent battles, whispered doubts, and nights soaked in tears that no one saw. It was a testament, a living proof of resilience that I held in my hand every time I looked at it. Every curve of her tiny face, every soft fold of her skin, every delicate finger wrapped tightly around mine, it all screamed louder than any voice of doubt or criticism ever had. I had succeeded. I still remember how my heart had trembled as I sent that photo. It was like pressing send was me daring the world, and especially my aunt, to see what I had become. To see what she said I never would be. The years before that moment were marked by the constant echo of her disapproval, her thinly veiled disdain at every family gathering. It wasn't just the words she said aloud, but the silence between them. The looks she gave, the sharpness in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. Her disbelief wasn't just a personal slight, it was a shroud that hung over me like a storm cloud, casting shadows over even my brightest days. When I think back to those family events, I can still hear the clatter of plates, the hum of conversations, and her voice cutting through the noise, though sometimes just a murmur beneath the surface, enough to sting. "You're not built for this," she'd say once, so coldly, that I wanted to vanish on the spot. Or the time she said, "Some people just don't have what it takes." I was only 25 then, young and vulnerable, struggling to keep my hope alive. Those words burrowed into my skin and settled deep inside, shaping a quiet fear that maybe she was right. But that photo, it changed everything. Holding that image in my hand, I felt a shift deep inside me, like a dam breaking after years of holding back a flood. This wasn't just about proving my aunt wrong. It was about reclaiming my own story. I realized that her disbelief was never just about me. It was rooted in her own fears and limitations, her own battles with acceptance, expectations, and perhaps regret. Maybe, deep down, she saw in me the potential for something she'd lost or never had, and that terrified her. I pictured her sitting alone in the sunroom, away from the noisy family gatherings where she often retreated. I imagined the flicker of doubt crossing her face when she first saw that photo. The image of my daughter, the living, breathing proof that I had beaten the odds, must have shaken something inside her. She probably didn't know how to process it at first. Maybe her silence was the sound of her walls trembling, the beginning of a crack in the armor of judgment she'd carried for so long. And maybe, just maybe, she was afraid. I could almost hear her thoughts, wrestling with the unexpected truth: she's really a mother now. And she's stronger than I thought. That realization is a powerful thing, both for the one who doubts and the one who overcomes. I felt it ripple through me like a slow-burning fire, lighting a path forward. I was no longer just the girl who struggled, the one who was underestimated and dismissed. I was a mother. A woman who had faced down fear, loneliness, and uncertainty and come out on the other side with new life growing inside her arms. Sitting there in the quiet of my living room, with the faint hum of the city outside and the soft, steady breathing of my daughter nearby, I let myself feel it all. The pride, the exhaustion, the deep ache of everything I had endured. But also the hope, the fragile, beautiful hope that this was only the beginning. Of course, I couldn't ignore the knot of uncertainty twisting in my chest. Would this moment be enough to change how she saw me? Could the years of silence and judgment be erased by one photo and one simple message? Or was this just a small flicker of connection in a sea of doubt that would soon be swallowed by the past? Those questions lingered, unspoken but persistent. Because change is never easy, especially when it involves people who have long held you back in their minds, even if they never say it outright. I remember my hands trembling as I looked at that photo again and again, as if trying to etch every detail into my memory. The softness of my daughter's cheek against the blanket. The tiny crease where her wrist met her hand. The way her breath rose and fell like a gentle wave, peaceful and steady. It was a moment frozen in time, but it also felt like a new beginning, a chance to rewrite the narrative not just of my life, but of my relationship with my aunt. I thought about the strength it took to carry this child against all odds, the endless doctor visits, the moments of heartbreak when tests came back negative, and the nights I cried silently, afraid to let anyone else see how broken I felt. Those memories made the photo even more precious. It was a symbol of survival, of fighting when everything inside me told me to give up. And yet, as powerful as that image was, it wasn't just about proving something to her or to anyone else. It was about proving it to myself. That I was worthy. That my struggles did not define me. That I was more than the sum of others' expectations. When the phone finally rang after I sent the photo, it was like the whole world held its breath with me. Hearing her voice, soft, uncertain, almost fragile, felt like stepping into uncharted territory. The disbelief in her tone was undeniable, but so was a flicker of something I never thought I'd hear from her, pride. A tentative, hesitant pride that felt both strange and wonderful. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but those words echoed in my heart louder than any cheer. It was as if, through that single call, a bridge had been built between the old wounds and the possibility of healing. The photo was never just about showing her what I had accomplished. It was about breaking the silence, opening a door, and allowing the possibility that love and acceptance might come in the most unexpected ways. As I sit here now, watching my daughter sleep, I know this is far from the end of our story. But it's a beginning, a fragile, hopeful beginning filled with promise and the quiet strength that only comes from surviving the impossible. Now, when I look back at that moment, the moment I sent her the photo, I realize it wasn't just a message or a snapshot, it was a turning point. Our relationship isn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Some wounds run so deep, so tangled, that they refuse to heal fully, no matter how much time passes or how much we try to mend them. But that photo, it marked the beginning of something new between us. Something fragile, yes, but real. I remember the first time I saw her after I sent that picture. It was at a family reunion, held in the sprawling backyard of my parents' house, under a sky so blue it almost felt unreal. The scent of grilled hamburgers and freshly cut grass filled the air, children laughing and running around with sticky fingers from popsicles and ice cream cones. The chatter of relatives mixed with the distant hum of cicadas created a comforting backdrop for what was about to unfold. When she spotted me from across the yard, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, a mixture of surprise and something softer, almost like acknowledgement. She didn't approach me immediately. Instead, she lingered, watching from a distance, her arms folded loosely over her chest. Her usual cold, sharp demeanor was tempered by something I hadn't seen before. Vulnerability, maybe. Or a reluctant respect. As I walked toward her, heart pounding with a strange mix of hope and nerves, I caught a quick breath of the warm summer air, tinged with the smell of sunscreen and blooming honeysuckle. The sun warmed my skin, but inside, a chill of anticipation rattled through me. I wondered how I'd find the courage to break the silence between us. "Jessica," she said finally, her voice quieter than I remembered, almost hesitant. She avoided eye contact for a moment before looking directly at me. I saw the photo. Your daughter. She's beautiful." Her words were simple, but they landed with the weight of 1,000 unspoken apologies. I nodded, managing a small smile, the one I had practiced in the mirror countless times before. "Thank you," I said softly, feeling a lump rise in my throat. We stood there for a moment, the sounds of the reunion swirling around us, but in that bubble between us, everything else faded away. I wanted to say so much more, to tell her how long I'd waited for this, how much her doubt had hurt, but instead, I let the silence speak. Sometimes, words aren't necessary to heal old wounds. Over the next few months, our interactions were cautious and measured. There were no grand gestures or sweeping declarations of forgiveness. Instead, we shared small moments, a quiet nod at a family dinner, a brief exchange of texts asking how the baby was doing. She still kept her distance, but the walls she'd built seemed less rigid, less unyielding. I noticed subtle changes in her demeanor. She listened more, her eyes softer when she spoke to me. Once, she surprised me by offering to babysit for an afternoon, a simple gesture, but one that meant the world. When I dropped my daughter off, I caught a glimpse of a smile on her face as she rocked the baby gently in the armchair, a sight I never imagined I'd witness. Of course, there are still moments when the past creeps in. When old habits of doubt flicker in her eyes, or when a careless word slips out. But those moments no longer define us. They are part of the history that shaped us but no longer controls our future. For me, becoming a mother transformed everything. It gave me a new kind of strength, one that's quiet but fierce. A strength that comes from loving someone so completely it changes how you see yourself. It's a strength that no amount of skepticism can shake. I am proud. Proud of the battles I fought and won, proud of the life I've created, proud of the woman I've become. And in a strange way, I'm grateful to my aunt for her disbelief. Because it forced me to prove something, not just to her, but to myself. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't anger or resentment. It's simply showing up. Thriving. Living your truth so fully that it can't be ignored. So here I am, mother, daughter, survivor, standing tall in the light of my own making. And while our story is far from perfect, it's ours. Marked by pain, yes, but also by growth, forgiveness, and the unshakable power of hope.